And now we have our primary. So what we can do is we can actually look at failover. You're going to notice you have some commands on the exec level. So you have an action or active failover exec. If you want to execute commands on a specific unit, you can reload standby and of course reset a unit or the failover group if it's to an unfailed state. But from here we'll do config T, then we'll specify failover. Let's try LAN interface, specify the interface name. Failover. You could specify a physical or sub-interface. In this case it will be gig 0/8. Failover LAN interface failover gigabit Ethernet 1/8, not 0/8. Non-failover interface config is cleared and its sub-interfaces. So let's try this again. Now it has been unconfigured. So failover link, failover name in this case would be failover. So failover interface IP for failover 192.168.255.1. Mask 255.255.252. And we can specify the standby IP address 192.168.255.2. So let's come back over here to see what's going on our Cisco primary. Show interface IP brief. Management 1/1 is actually now down, so show run failover. Failover LAN interface 1/8. Failover link failover gig 1/8. Failover interface IP failover primary and standby. So what we want to do here is to make sure we specify the failover LAN unit as primary. Show failover. Failover on unit primary LAN interface gig 1/8 is up. Pull frequency. Monitored interface is 1 of 290, that's maximum. Version 9.14 mate is currently unknown. It shows our serial number, last failover, this host, and other host has failed. Stateful failover logical update. Alright, so let's come back over here to 10.2.121. Show failover. Failover off. So let's turn failover on. Now you're going to see that it's on. LAN interface not configured. ... So here we actually need to configure the secondary unit. So failover LAN unit is going to be secondary. We have to specify the failover LAN interface for failover. It's going to be gig 1/8. Okay, it's been configured. Failover link failover. Which, keep in mind, this failover link is actually calling to the LAN interface of failover here. And then lastly, we need to do a failover interface IP for failover as 192.168.255.1, and the standby is 192.168.255.2. Once that's done, we can show failover, which it looks like it shut itself down here. So let's try to reconnect to this guy. Okay, end configuration replication to mate. So I think we're good here. Show failover. So this host is primary. Secondary is currently bulk syncing at the moment. Slot 1, 5506. source fire 5506. It shows the mate's information. Alright, show failover. You can do descriptor, exec, history, interface, state, and statistics. So this host is primary active, other host is secondary, and it's ready. Last failure reason was COM failure because we hadn't created it yet. The sync is done and the MAC is set. So let's do this again, show failover. Let's try the interface. My IP address, other interface, and let's do show failover. Alright, we are good. Standby is now ready. So we currently have two Cisco ASAs, one as the primary, one as the secondary. We do show interface IP brief, and we'll look at the gigabit 1/8. That is the LAN state failover interface. Can't really see anything on it, so show run interface management 1/1. That's good. Let's try to connect back to the secondary again, and you'll notice we can't. So let's come back over here to our COM port. We're on the primary at the moment. Let's switch over to our secondary. And look at that, it still says it's the primary. Let's move the console port back over. And we're still plugged into primary. So oddly enough, you'll see here, I'm going to move the camera real quick, come in close. So you're going to see here on the Cisco ASAs, you have three little blinky lights. Power, status, and active. This will tell you with the green light that this bottom here is the actual active ASA in the pair. So I'm going to make sure we're plugged into the console port on our secondary. So you'll see there I'm plugged into the secondary interface that's not active. And as you'll see here, I'm still plugged into the Serial 3 console port, and it still shows as Cisco primary. So you'll notice that no matter which console port you plug into, you'll see the primary for the configuration. However, let's try to come in here and configure it. Configuration replication is not performed from standby unit to active unit. Configurations are no longer synchronized. So you want to make sure when you're trying to configure a secondary, you don't get things like this. Hence one of the reasons why you can't actually connect to the secondary's SSH address. But from here, let's just disconnect from 21 and exit out. So let's see, show interface IP brief. Let's look at gigabit 1/1. Keep in mind this is still plugged into the secondary, so let's verify if our failover works. Config T, interface gig 1/1. From here we have a bunch of different options for configuration, but for now, show run interface gig 1/1. It is currently shut down, so we'll no shut the port. This is going to be port 1, so this will be our inside interface. So we'll create a name interface of, let's just say, inside. Now when you do level inside and outside, it gives a security level by default. The security level for inside is set to 100. If we say security level, question mark, it is 0 through 100. Now keep in mind, by default, these types of firewalls use security to allow communication. Now for the Cisco ASA, it is always allow a higher security level to a lower security level. So if I have inside set to 100 and say DMZ set to 50, inside will be able to talk to DMZ without any issues, because the higher 100 can talk to a lower, say, 50. Now the DMZ on the other hand is 50, but it cannot talk to a higher level, in this case inside of 100. Now since outside is 0, Anything above it can talk to the outside, which is usually internet-based traffic. But internet-based traffic cannot talk to any higher level by default, and this is what creates our firewall rules, not allowing the internet to get into a more trusted zone unless you have access policies allowing traffic from one zone to another. So let's go back and look at our gig 1/1. Show run interface gig 1/1. We have a nameif of inside, a security level 100, and a no IP address. So let's give this an IP address of 172.16.0.1, 255.255.255.0, and then of course you have a standby IP address as well. 172.16.0.2 will be our standby. Once we do this and hit enter, show interface IP brief, you're going to see we have an IP address on gig 1/1 now. Show run interface gig 1/1. Now we have our primary and standby IP addressing. So let's come back over here to our secondary console port. Show interface IP brief. So you'll see here that it is automatically synchronizing the standby IP address to the standby ASA. So if this primary should fail, the secondary will automatically take over for this particular interface. So keep in mind they are both down and down. Give me 1 second, I'm going to see if I can plug these interfaces in. So as you'll see here, I plugged into port 1 on the standby ASA, and you're going to notice it is switching to active on the standby. Show interface IP brief. So you'll see here that the standby is now active on the 0.1. But you're going to notice that gig 1/8 is still 255.2. Management is 10.2.100.20. So let's see if we can go back to 100.20 here and reconnect. There we go. Cisco ASA primary, enable. Now I have two separate enable passwords, one for the primary, one for the secondary. So what I'm going to do is type in the one for the primary and see if it works. And it did. So with the 100.20, I am technically connected to the secondary currently. So show run interface management 1/1. So you'll see here IP address 2.100.20, show failover. So you're going to notice this host secondary is actually active now. Now oddly enough, if you look at the management interface, 10.2.100.20 is now active. And you'll see why it failed in the show failover status command, or state command. So, interface failure, inside no link. So I mean, if you lose a link, it'll fail over. You don't actually have to do any of these things by hand. So, that's one of the good things to keep in mind about active standby failover in a Cisco ASA. Now, if we were to unplug the inside interface, you're going to notice that the secondary remains active. But if we plug the inside in on our primary, you're going to notice now that the standby switches back to standby. Show interface IP brief. There you go. Now, oddly enough, management 1/1 is unassigned. Kind of interesting. But you'll notice also that the gigabit 1/8 stays as 255.2 instead of switching to 255.1, because the 255.1 is set for the primary unit only. So let's reconnect to our primary. Skip this, type in our password, enable, and there you go. So the enable password was actually synced to the standby as well. So remember, I created a different enable password on the secondary unit before I did HA failover, and here you see it's been synchronized. Show interface IP brief. And you're going to see here now that the 10.2.120 management interface has switched over to the original primary. Show failover state. So you'll see here this host is primary. Once again, no link. Show failover. Primary is now active again. We do have the ability, if we needed to upgrade, say one at a time. So if we were to come over here to failover, and then we could make this system to be the active unit of a failover pair. Now, which is kind of odd because this is the system I'm on. How can you make the active system the active system? So that really doesn't make too much sense to me. However, if we come back over to failover exec, we can actually run commands on the mate or the standby. So if we came over here to the standby unit and said, okay, we want to say failover active, we can actually switch over. However, cannot execute the command on mate because the mate is in transient state. So let's check again, show failover. Secondary has failed. Now it probably failed because the interface gig 1/1 is disconnected. If I was to plug in 1/1, that command I just ran would make the secondary active. We also have the ability to do a failover reset if need be. And of course to reload the standby if we were making changes. So that's kind of it for this video. If I chop it up, that's going to be ASA active failover high availability.